This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one leader, one country, or one decision. This is about a system quietly changing the rules of violence. For decades, there was a boundary. What a government did to its own people stayed internal. Condemned, sanctioned, observed, but rarely answered with force, that boundary is eroding. Not loudly, not all at once, but through a new kind of conditional threat, one that treats internal bloodshed as an external trigger. The danger isn't what has happened, it's what no longer has to happen for escalation to begin. When a system starts signaling that domestic killing can invite foreign firepower, timelines compress. Decisions accelerate. Mistakes become irreversible. And once that logic is accepted, it doesn't stay contained. If you think this is distant, pause. Because this mechanism doesn't require invasion. It doesn't require consensus. It only requires a line and someone crossing it. Stay with me. Because the next question isn't who crosses that line. It's who decides where it is. What controls this system now is not diplomacy, not treaties, not even ideology. It's threshold management. Power no longer waits for wars to begin. It watches for metrics, body counts, image, signals that can be framed as justification. The center of gravity has shifted away from leaders and toward triggers. Once violence inside a country is treated as a measurable threshold, something that can activate external force, the system stops being political. It becomes procedural. You don't need permission. You don't need debate. You need a condition to be met. That's the quiet change. Because when enforcement is conditional, restraint becomes performative. Every actor starts testing the edge. How much force is too much? How visible is visible enough? And the more the system relies on red lines, the more it invites someone to cross one deliberately or by miscalculation. This isn't about control through stability anymore. It's control through anticipation. And once anticipation replaces restraint, escalation stops being a decision. It becomes momentum. Stay with me. Because the most dangerous shifts are the ones that felt reasonable at first. There was a time when repression moved slowly. It accumulated, warnings were issued, reports were filed, time existed between action and consequence. That time is disappearing. Before, internal violence was absorbed, condemned later, sanctioned eventually, processed through institutions designed to delay reaction. Now, delay is treated as weakness. What changed wasn't policy. It was normalization. The idea that images travel instantly, that numbers circulate before context. That pressure builds before verification finishes. And slowly, almost invisibly, the system adapted. Governments learned that silence could be fatal, that restraint could be misread as permission, that waiting might allow a narrative to harden against them. So responses shortened, language sharpened, consequences were preloaded. This is how slow change becomes dangerous. Not because it shocks, but because it feels practical. Each adjustment made sense on its own. Together, they removed the buffer that once absorbed mistakes. And when buffers vanish, systems don't fail gradually. They snap. Hold that thought, because the first visible shock is never the real crisis. Then the shock arrives, not as policy, not as strategy, but as numbers, bodies counted, ages listed, security forces included. The figures don't explain anything. They don't need to. Because once casualties cross a certain point, interpretation replaces analysis. The story hardens before context can catch up. What looks like a single crackdown is actually a signal, not to the people inside the system, but to everyone watching from the outside. This is how a local action becomes a global variable. Force is applied internally. Visibility converts it into leverage. And leverage invites response. The mistake is thinking the shock is the crisis. It isn't. It's the proof that a threshold is being tested. When deaths are counted publicly, They stop being statistics. They become timers. And once timers start, every actor recalculates, not based on morality, but on how close they are to a line they claim they won't cross. Watch carefully here, because what happens next is never announced. It's inferred. Here's the part most people miss. The system doesn't react to violence itself. It reacts to where the cost lands. Force on the streets is cheap. It's visible but absorbable. What isn't cheap is disruption to the flows that keep the system breathing. Money, energy, connectivity. This is where power actually concentrates. When pressure stays physical, the damage is contained. But when pressure touches revenue, legitimacy collapses faster than authority can respond. That's why regimes can survive protests for years, and why they panic when labor stops moving. Because force can silence crowds. It cannot restart stalled systems. Those who benefit from the structure know this. They insulate themselves. They outsource pain downward. Those who absorb the damage feel it immediately. Through inflation, scarcity, uncertainty, this imbalance is not accidental. It's the design. And once disruption moves from streets to infrastructure, the question stops being, can the system hold? It becomes, how long before someone intervenes to protect their interests? Stay with me, because the next shock doesn't slow things down. It speeds everything up. Then the rhythm changes. Events stop spacing themselves out. They stack. Crackdowns intensify. Connections drop. Statements harden. There's no time to verify, only to respond. Each move triggers another calculation. Each calculation shortens the window for restraint. This is where systems lose balance, because escalation no longer requires intent. It only requires momentum. A shutdown meant to isolate becomes proof of guilt. A warning meant to deter becomes a dare. A pause meant to calm looks like hesitation. Actors start reacting to reactions, and once that loop begins, nobody is fully in control anymore. Not the people enforcing order, not the people resisting it, not the ones watching from afar. Everything starts moving faster than the rules that were supposed to contain it. This is the phase where mistakes stop being correctable, where restraint feels risky, where waiting feels dangerous. And the most dangerous part? Everyone believes the other side will blink first. They rarely do. This is the point where it stops being abstract, because this system doesn't just move states. It moves you. When escalation accelerates, the cost doesn't land on strategy rooms. It lands on daily life. Prices shift before explanations arrive. Connections vanish without warning. Jobs pause. Travel freezes. Messages don't go through. And you're told this is temporary, necessary, contained. But systems under stress don't isolate damage cleanly. They export it. When force becomes the language of control, uncertainty becomes the background noise of everything else. You plan less. You trust less. You wait more. This is how distance collapses. What happens over there starts shaping decisions right here. Not through ideology, through friction. If you feel like events are moving faster than your ability to process them, that's not an accident. That's the system tightening. Pay attention to this moment. Because once human impact becomes visible, pressure doesn't ease. It multiplies. Stay with me. Because the next phase doesn't stay personal. It goes global. This is where containment fails. Because systems like this don't respect borders. They respect incentives. Once instability becomes visible, markets react before governments do. Allies hedge. Adversaries probe. What began as an internal struggle turns into a signal test, not just of power, but of response time. Other states start asking the same question at once. If this crosses a line, what happens next? And more importantly, how fast? Energy routes feel it first. Supply chains tighten quietly. Diplomatic language stiffens. Nobody announces a shift. They just adjust. This is how a local crisis becomes a reference point, not because it spreads ideologically, but because it rewrites expectations. If escalation can trigger here, it can trigger elsewhere. If thresholds move here, they move everywhere. And once multiple actors recalibrate simultaneously, the system stops being predictable. Not chaotic, just unstable. Hold onto that uncertainty, because what comes next isn't one future, it's several from here. The system doesn't choose a direction. It opens options. The first path looks like adjustment. Violence is calibrated. Thresholds are respected just enough. Pressure vents without rupture. The system survives changed, but intact. The second path is erosion. Nothing breaks at once. Confidence drains. Capital hesitates. Authority hardens while legitimacy thins. Everything still functions until it doesn't. Then there's rupture. Not planned, not declared, triggered by a misread signal, a delayed response, a moment where restraint is mistaken for weakness. In that path, escalation outruns control. External pressure collides with internal collapse, and decisions made to deter end up accelerating the outcome they were meant to prevent. None of these paths are clean. All of them carry cost, and the system doesn't announce which one it's on. You only recognize it in hindsight, when the pace suddenly feels irreversible. Don't decide yet which future this is, because the final danger isn't choosing wrong. It's thinking the choice has already been made. Here's what makes this dangerous. Systems like this don't collapse when someone pulls a trigger. They collapse when too many people assume the trigger won't be pulled. Every actor in this chain believes they're preventing something worse, that their warning will deter, that their restraint will be noticed. That escalation can still be managed. That belief is the risk. Because once force becomes conditional, once visibility becomes leverage, once timelines compress beyond deliberation, control becomes a narrative, not a fact. Nothing about this ends cleanly. There is no moment where someone announces this has gone too far. There is only acceleration, justified step by justified step. If you're waiting for certainty, you won't get it. If you're waiting for clarity, it will arrive too late. The only real question left is whether we recognize this pattern before it locks in, or only after it becomes irreversible. This isn't a story to watch passively. It's a system you need to understand, because the next time a line is crossed, the reaction may already be automatic. If you want to see where this logic leads next, stay with me, because once systems like this activate, they don't stop on their own.